Hello, everyone. I'm happy to welcome Karl Emdin from Paradox Interactive. Karl Emdin has been working with games as a software engineer since 2003 for different companies. And he also has split his time 50% as designer since 2015. A reactive world, bring in order to random events. Karl Emdin, welcome please.
Thank you. Okay. So welcome everyone. Let's get started. Yeah, you heard the introduction. I'm not going to say that much more. I'm actually working at a studio called Paradox Arctic, which is an internal studio within Paradox Interactive. We started about 3.5 years ago in northern Sweden. We have worked on quite a lot of things, but most recently the porting of Pillars of Eternity to console. And we have also worked on Magicka 2, for example. All right, let's get started. So today I'm going to talk about cause and effects. And in the event system in Crusader Kings 2 demonstrates this pretty well, I think. But before we get started, I think it's reasonable to give everyone an idea of what Crusader Kings 2 is. So I'm going to start first with a quick poll. If you please can raise your hand if you have played Crusader Kings 2. Okay. Then I think the introduction will be quite useful. So, Paradox are famous for our grand strategy games. This is one of them. They usually take place on a map, and where there are lots of provinces. You might own a couple of these provinces, and within them you raise armies to conquer new provinces. There are some resources involved, like gold, for example, which you get from your provinces and spend on lots of things, like building armies. The game is actually played in real time with a pause. So once the game is running, days tick by one, and you can pause the game if you want as well. But Crusader Kings 2 is actually quite different from the other Paradox grand strategy games. Some of the most important parts is that you're actually not playing as a nation in this game. In our other games, you tend to play as nations, but here you play as the ruler of a dynasty. So you are a person in this game, which also means that you can die. And if you die in Crusader Kings 2, you get to play as the successor within your dynasty. In Crusader Kings 2, you also have personality traits. Every character has personality traits. For example, you can have two sons, where the oldest one happens to be an imbecile, and the younger one happens to be a genius. So then you have to ask yourself, who is going to succeed me, and how do I make this happen? So obviously you don't want to play as the imbecile, since stats are really important to run your provinces efficiently. And the second thing is, as I said, you play as a character, and you also interact with other characters all the time. You never talk to the country of France, for example, the Kingdom of France. You talk to the current king of France. That means people have opinions of each other, and if he happens to dislike you, well, then the Kingdom of France dislikes you. But if he has a son who perhaps likes you better, well, perhaps you can speed up the succession a little. So it's a game about opinion management, where you try to make the powerful people like you in different ways. And Crusader Kings, like most Paradox grand strategy games, is highly moddable. And players have direct access to pretty much all content in the game. They can replace graphics and they can edit events directly just by opening up Notepad, for example. Almost all script is written directly in a readable text format, for better or worse. So this is a picture from the Game of Thrones mod, which has helped make Crusader Kings 2 very popular. Right. So, back to this talk. Events in Crusader Kings. So, what do they bring to the table? Well, I think, first of all, immersion. If you look at the game that isn't very reactive, it can really ruin the immersion. If we take, for example, open world RPG, where you decide to break into a house and steal someone's pants for some reason. And the very next day, you walk out into the town wearing these pants, and you run into the owner of the pants. And a game that isn't very reactive would perhaps start the conversation with, "Hello, what a nice weather." A game that is more reactive, the character might say something like, "Oh, I had a break-in last night." And the even more reactive game would, of course, say, "Why are you wearing my pants?" and call the guards. Of course, it's not that simple. I mean, if you're building a big game, it might not be the most important thing, but one small piece of the immersion puzzle. Crusader Kings 2 does take a lot of things into account. To give you an example, the probability of getting captured in battle increases by 10% if you happen to have the measles right now. Might sound like a strange thing, but well, you can get some images in your head perhaps about how how that came to be. So the event system in Crusader Kings 2 is actually quite modular. It would be easy to apply to many other games. Sure, there are hooks within the game code, like to talk to other systems, like the provinces or the gold system and things like that. But whenever you add a system, like if we would, for example, add a weather simulator, we could add some hooks right away. One for polling the weather system, asking what kind of weather it is, and adding some way for the weather system to trigger events, like there's a storm or something. And once these hooks are in place, the scripters can pretty much keep adding how much ever content they want without the need of a coder. So it's also worth noting that it's a sandbox game. The story isn't linear in any fashion. It's hard to know exactly what the player wants. There are no set goals in this game. Maybe one player wants to rule the world, someone else just wants to, well, be an asshole. Oh, all right. So we're gonna quickly play the game for a bit here. You are King Edward of England. You are very famous English king, very popular among the population, and you have lots of gold, lots of prestige. You have a pretty good plan on how to invade France. It shouldn't take more than 100 years. And, well, you're all set to go down in history as one of the great kings. You're at the prime of your time, of your life, except for that there's a stinging pain in your chest. Oh. Sorry, you have just been murdered by your wife, the queen. Well, these things seem to happen now and then in Crusader Kings. So why did she murder you? Was it because that mistress you acquired last week, or the one you got pregnant? Or was it that you pillaged her father's domains? Or was it just that comment on her new dress last weekend? Well, we're going to take a quick look at how you get murdered in CK2. First of all, it's the opinion system that I mentioned before. You need people to dislike you. They can dislike you for a lot of reasons. Here's Prince Thomas. He seems to dislike you because he's also a pretender to the Kingdom of England. And he has some opinions about your traits. You can increase opinion by giving people titles, and you can also give them gold for temporary boosts. And once enough people dislike you, they tend to start a murder plot. It usually takes some kind of trigger that someone is in line for succession, or that you perhaps, well, acquired a mistress. Eventually, when enough people join the plot, they make an attempt for your life, and if they're successful, well, you die and play as the next successor in your dynasty. So, these are the plot system and the opinion system. They're an example of two more hard-coded systems within CK2. They're not easy to pull out and put into another game. But they are really essential for the game. It's not, well, many games are built around core systems just like these. And they do have lots of data as well. The opinions you saw, they are all data, but it's still, well, we're going to look at the more modular event system now. I should also say that the opinion system is really, really cool. More games should have systems like that. Okay, so it happens that we get to play as the queen. So there are two things going on. No one seems to really care about what happened to the old king. Finally, some events. So the first event, a comet has been sighted. That's a bad omen. Sometimes. Well, this time it's probably a bad omen. And the peasant seems to dislike you for some reason. Well, it could be the high taxes that the late king decided to, well, the taxes he decided to raise. We're going to look at how these events are scripted. As you can see, there are often a picture, some text, and some, well, one or more buttons at the bottom. So this is first the comet event. It has the description, the options, and some effects. Usually, if there are more options, there are different effects tied to each of the options. It's not uncommon that you have event chains where you first display one event window, and then direct left you press the button, a new one pops up, or after a while, maybe a couple of days or a couple of months, depending on what the story within the event is. So, how do we trigger these events? Well, we could make it the old school way, the traditional and the expensive way. We could make a comet trajectory system. Sure, that would be cool. And a peasant unrest system, well, that's probably feasible. But let's make a really cheap and dirty solution instead. We will simply use a mean time to happen system. So what this means is that we specify simply that we want an event to happen within a certain time frame. And then every day, the system polls each event and sees, did this trigger today? No? Okay, let's check the next day. Did this trigger today? No? And keeps on checking like that. So the comet sighting, we want it to happen like once every 100 years. So the mean time to happen is set to, well, roughly 100 years. The problem is, of course, that this is probability, and this will just be converted to a percentage chance every day by the system. So there's a risk. It's not big, but there's a risk that there will be two comets. first one comet and then a new comet the very next day. So that's the problem with probability. But we can add a simple condition. Now our event system has some conditions as well. We can check that, or once we trigger this event, we set a flag, and then it won't be triggered again for another 50 years. All right, how about the peasants then? Well, we want this to happen around every 10 years, but we add some more advanced requirements. We want the taxes to be high. We want certain laws to be in order, things like that. So this event won't trigger every 10 years as long as none of these conditions are fulfilled. But once you raise the taxes, it will hit you within a couple of years. So what is the queen going to do about this peasant uprising? So whatever queen does, she hires some mercenaries and decides to defeat them in battle. And she wants to prove herself worthy on the battlefield and decides to lead the troops herself. Is that a smart move? Actually, it is. So she defeats them in battle, and that's great. Now we want to give her some experience points. Okay, so we need an experience points system. All these systems. Where are our coders? They seem to be in St. Petersburg right now. Okay, can we solve this on our own? Yeah, well, we could give her a trait that says she's an experienced commander, which boosts her stats, which is triggered by winning a battle. Yeah. Accidentally, we had that trigger. So we check every day. Mean time to happen 1, which means it's going to happen like every day. If you won a battle, we give you the trait experienced commander. It would work. It's not the optimal solution because once you have tens of thousands of characters and you start polling this every day for every one of them, the CPU will suffer pretty bad. And if you have like 1,000 of these events to check every day as well. So, of course, we do the other way around. We introduce the pulse. Simple message system, which fires a pulse when a certain action happens. In this case, a battle has ended. We fire the pulse only to the characters involved. And then it's easy to script. We know like what's going on. We don't have to check that there's been a battle, if this person was involved or not. We only have to perhaps check a flag if this is the winner or the loser of the battle. So this is a lot cheaper. And in CK2, we have more than 100 of these pulses. For example, on marriage, on assassination, etc. And whenever we introduce, like, for example, a weather system, if we would introduce a weather system, we would add pulses for this as well. We could add, as I said before, like on storm or on winter's coming or something. All right, so how about the comet? What would the comet listen to? Well, that's kind of tricky, and it's tricky with the peasant event as well, since they aren't really, well, it's hard to pick one thing they would listen for. So instead, we put them in a simplified version of the old mean time to happen system, which is just a yearly pulse. So once every year, we trigger one of these events. So not all of them. And we have, as you can see at the bottom, we have added the nothing happens event to give you some breathing room. This is, well, it's a start of something new, but the comet and the peasant uprising, are they just as likely? No, of course not. So we add some weights. Here you can see that the likelihood of the comet being sighted is just 1. but the likelihood of nothing to happen is about 50. How this works is like if you imagine a bag of tokens, and well, an empty bag, and you take tokens. On one token, it says comet sighted, put it in the bag. On 7 of these, it says peasant uprising, and on 50 of these, it says nothing happens. You put them in the bag, and randomly draw one, and see, and then you fire that event, and then put it back in the bag, which is kind of good. We're getting somewhere, but the problem is that the comet can be triggered twice, 2 years in a row. It's better than 2 days in a row, but that old requirement we had, can we introduce that again? Sure, we can adjust the probability. So the probability was 1 in 75. Here we say that if the comet was recently sighted, we reduce that probability by minus 100%. So that's pretty binary. Better example is if we look at the peasant uprising. It had a base chance of 7, but if the taxes are high, if you still have the serfdom laws and, well, some other conditions, like if there's a plague in the province, we increase that base chance of 7. So what happens here is that the comet probability of 1 and peasant probability of 7 goes up to 63. So every year these values go up and down, and they change depending on what you do within the game, what happens within the game simulation. So that's one example of this reactiveness. It's worth noting that there's no longer 75 tokens, it's 120 or something. So we'll get back to that problem later. But this way of thinking is, I imagine myself at least, that it's simple for the brain to comprehend, that you increase the risk of something happening, like by some kind of percentage. You're not sure exactly how much, maybe. Like when driving a car, do you wear a seatbelt? Well, that would protect me. It doesn't prevent you from ever being killed in a car accident. And just as well as if you don't wear a seatbelt, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be injured. So again, probability is not binary here. It's something that kind of moves around, and people's perception of how much a seatbelt helps, it varies as well. So back to the probability of getting captured in battle. Here are some examples of modifiers, how likely you're going to be captured in a battle. For example, if you're craven, if you're a coward, well, you tend to perhaps stay at the back of the battle. The game doesn't say that. That was me saying it, and probably you have had an idea in your head as well, that the craven person will kind of stay out of danger. So how about the lunatic? How would they get captured in battle? Well, right now that's up to you to imagine that within your head. Okay, so this event system in CK2, I think it can be applied to lots of games out there, to many different kind of features. For example, it's easy to come up with ideas of how a spell system would use the weights, perhaps. Maybe using mind control versus troll should be easier than versus, well, something else. It's used quite a lot within AI in our games. The AI randomly picks between options, but they're all weighted, so it won't pick the most stupid ones. Well, maybe once in a while it will pick some really stupid thing, but that just adds spice to the game. I'm going to show a quick example how we could make a character generator based on a script like this. It's more like procedural generated characters here. So we're going to generate a female high elf warrior. And we're going to find out what background does she have. So background happens to depend on lots of things. Maybe her class, her race, her gender, and her abilities. So we look at the warrior background, the warrior class, and it says that you're most likely to have been a soldier, a guard, or mercenary. Yeah, sounds fair. There's a small chance here that you've been a pickpocket. Okay, so it's about 7-8% here. Doesn't really suit this woman here. Would she have been a pickpocket? Okay, so let's add some modifiers to the pickpocket background. If you are female, we reduce the probability by 25%. If you're high elf, we reduce it further. Maybe if you would have been a hobbit, we would have increased the chance. Now, notice that this is independent of the class right now. This doesn't take the class into consideration. So if it would have rolled a thief, if we would have rolled a thief who was a high elf, the probability of that character having been a pickpocket would also have been reduced. And you could add lots of more things to this character generation. Perhaps the starting equipment depends on the background and the region of the world you're born in, etc., etc. So there are lots of similarities to procedural generation here. Okay, so here are some things worth noting. First of all, the player's perspective. I showed you the list of things that affect the probability of getting captured. That list, I think it has around 20 factors. And it's probably not feasible to show these to the players. Currently, they're not shown. And you could perhaps show the strongest factors, kind of try to derive which ones triggered the event this time or something like that. But it's tricky to present this to the player. And it's easy for all this fantastic content to get lost if you can't present it well. And some people, when they play games like this, they're fine with just knowing that if you have high taxes, the probability of a peasant uprising is larger. Sure, that makes sense. Other players, the more classic paradox player usually wants to see lots of numbers. They want to see exactly how much is the chance or the risk increased by raising the taxes by 4.8%. So CK2 happens to be one of the paradox games where there are more role players players who enjoy playing the game just as it plays out and not looking at the exact numbers all the time. But it's important here to know your audience. And randomness is, of course, hard to see a pattern within if you only trigger an event once. So maybe the king was just assassinated and there's a comet in the sky. Was this a coincidence or not? It's really hard to know. If this comet only shows up like once every 100 years. But on the other hand, if you generate 1,000 characters using the character generator I just showed, it's easier to spot these patterns. You're going to see that, okay, so there aren't that many high elf pickpockets. And it's of course important that a player gets to know the game. How reactive is this game? If one event takes a lot of things into consideration, it's obviously triggered just after this assassination or something. And then another event just doesn't care what's going on. It's hard for the player to get a picture of how reactive is this game really. And another thing that gets tricky is when there are a lot of scripters on the project. It's hard to keep track of everything. Crusader Kings 2 by now is 5.5 years old or something like that, with lots of DLC, etc. And it's really hard to keep track of everything. And I suggest some kind of organizational tool, and like spreadsheets and things like that. It would also be great. We were looking into this. If you could like visualize how the events are connected with each other. And one more thing I was going to mention. Yeah, just a couple of months ago, I heard the CK2 had been discussing making a Marco Polo event, for example. And they sat down and started to discuss what will this event be about, and yeah, the road to China and things like that. And someone asked, wasn't there a Marco Polo event? Didn't we make one last year? Okay, I'll better check. And by the next meeting, he came back and said, well, we actually have 3 Marco Polo events. So it's really easy to miss what someone else has introduced into the game already. Okay, so understanding the probability. This is also tricky because maybe when you add the comet event the first time, it's a likelihood of 1 in 100 for it to trigger. But as you add more events, maybe soon it's 1 in 300. Again, some kind of tool that helps you visualize the probabilities. For the character generator, if you generate 1 million characters, you can quickly see hard numbers, how many of these hobbit paladins were generated. Oh, one more thing. If you have some really rare events, like this event will only trigger between the year of 1244 and 1246, it's important to boost the probability of it actually happening because it only has like 3 pulses where it can trigger. So maybe the weight should be like 90% or something, like really huge. Randomness with memory. So some kind of progressive probability is usually nice to have. You often have these like requirements that you want that you want an event to trigger only once, or maybe that you want it to trigger once and then wait at least 50 years, like the comet. Right now, it's easy to script, but if you have to script this for every event, it's much better if you include this kind of repeat logic into the script language itself. And the progressive probability, you probably want some events that never trigger you want the likelihood to increase after a while, at least. And finally, standalone testing. So just starting up Crusader Kings 2 can take, well, a minute or so. And it's not feasible to test your events by starting the game every time. So it's great to have some form of way of testing everything without starting the game. It really reduces the iteration times if you're able to do this. And you can automate, maybe, by running scripts that just start the script system, verifies that these events trigger correctly or that the outcome is the expected. You can use a test-driven approach, maybe write a condition that you want this event chain to eventually give the character 50 gold or something. And as long as not all paths lead to giving you 50 gold, the test fails. So the scripters can develop develop the event and see the tests being executed for all scripted right. And of course, getting reports from automated build systems about which events and tests are working. Okay, thank you for listening.
And now Karl is ready to answer your questions. If you have a question, make sure that you speak in that microphone.
So I'm a huge fan of Paradox games. Thank you for these games. And I have a question. In the Paradox games, we have a lot of great user modifications, like Kaiserreich, CK++, and other. And my question is, how many ideas you took from user modifications and increment into your games or DLCs?
Sorry,
how many ideas from user modifications you took?
From user
modifications, mods.
Mods.
Yeah.
How many ideas? Well, unfortunately, I joined Paradox after the game was developed, so I can't speak for it. Sorry, I just don't know.
Well, thank you for your talk and thank you for your games. I'm a huge fan. And I have a question about one particular feature, or maybe it's a bug. That's a question. So, in Crusader Kings, when your ruler is mad, you can appoint a horse as a counselor. And then you can make your horse teach your children. And horse's culture is basically horse. And when horse teaches your children, they become horses. So, was it intended or is it a bug?
That's a classic. As far as I know, it wasn't intended in the first place, but once the bug showed up, it became so popular on the forums. So it was cleaned up and made sure it didn't crash anything. So since then, it's around.
Senka, I have a question. Do you use true random or some special random for checking probability? For example, if probability of some event is 10%, do I get it after 10 checks, or I can get it never?
So right now, we have none of this progressive probability. So the percentage chance is static, and so there's the probability of it happening twice in a row or never happening. There's always the risk of that. So it's something. Well, it would probably be useful to introduce.
Hello. What is your opinion of re-rolls? I mean, this is maybe a problem in the strategy games and RPGs when you get some misfortunate event and you hack a little bit and just load your later save and just hope for the best. Do you think it's a problem or it's not a problem?
Well, I mean, it's up to the player how they want to experience the game. In Paradox games, we have an Iron Man mode, which basically means that you can't load if you don't quit. So if an event is triggered and you quit, then it's saved. I guess it's possible to kill the process or something to get around it. But I mean, that's up to you. I mean, Crusader Kings 2 is I think personally, I started playing it like the classical Paradox games, trying to min-max and find all the best combinations of everything. But once I started to realizing that the fun happens like in the unexpected, and you should like embrace losing sometimes. If you go into the forums and read, you see a lot of after-action reports from players who have experienced the weirdest things. Well, there are so many examples, I can't come up with one right now, but long stories about how their playthroughs ended with them being dying or like being totally eliminated, and how much they enjoyed it. But again, it differs from player to player. If they want to conquer the world, maybe they're not too happy with these random things that, well, you seldom get killed by a random event, for example, but things not going their way.
Hi, thank you for an interesting talk. I have one question about how you manage to control the sanity of all these events that you have. I mean, the amount of events that you have impacts the probabilities upon each other. They have impact essentially all over the place. So I'm curious, do you have some sort of automated system to test this so that it doesn't go completely bananas? Do you have like unit tests or some sort of permanent simulation running offline or something like that?
Well, so the most common simulation is just that we let the AI play with itself during the night. Like for every build, we let the AI play just to make sure that nothing's totally broken. But I'm not sure exactly how much we look at the probability logs. The thing is that we have lots of events, but within each of these pulses, there aren't that many events. There are like maybe 20 events tied to their own yearly trigger, for example. So it's not that hard to dig into. And if you turn on the logging, you can see like what were the probabilities this time, and you can go back perhaps. But it's not very automated, no. We don't get any automatic reports or anything. So it tends to break, but on the other hand, the game doesn't involve real money or anything like that. So if things are just a bit off, people are usually fine with it.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexander Dzuba, Sven's Vision. We do play tests worldwide, and my question is related to this. What you tell is very interesting, but have you done some playtesting, some research? Does it affect user satisfaction? Does it improve fun generation from your games? Thank you.
So I haven't heard of us doing that, no. So it's more like, I would say it's a theory based on experience or something. So we haven't done any like A/B testing and things like that. And it's would probably be worthwhile looking into.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question, the last one. Seems no question. Thanks so much for your speech.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
we keep questioning the speakers from the 4C conference. Hi, introduce yourself, please.
My name is Kimmo Kari. I'm Chief Product Officer of Rival Games, and then I'm also sort of BizDev godfather of Game Music Collective. Game Music Collective is Europe's first professional orchestra that is focused on playing video game music.
That sounds great. Tell us about your personal very first video game you've ever played.
It's Hack from DOS Hack from '82. I'm proud that I even hacked Hack. So it's a rogue type of game. Actually, I just Google a picture of it. I don't know if it can be seen. It's this type of game. Yep. So it's a roguelike dungeon crawler, and it's amazing that even '82 they could achieve to this thing we nowadays many games try to achieve in free-to-play era called infinite gameplay. Even '82 this game had it, and it's very sort of like story heavy game. So it's almost like reading a book, and the only graphics there are black and white and made with ASCII symbols only. And if you have a giant spider, for example, I remember what was it, at sign or something, and then when I was a 10-year-old boy, you know, that in my imagination that giant spider was much more than ever. I try to nowadays play some more graphical versions of this hack. There is NetHack and other versions. And I'm always disappointed of them because in my imagination the giant spiders were much more scarier and better. So I still prefer the NetHack with ASCII letters.
Well, there's no school like the old school, as we know. But now that there's a lot of games with beautiful graphics and engines and whatnot, what's your favorite video game of all time?
All time, if you take this graphic aspect.
Just overall.
It's a difficult question because I would like still say it's this hack, DOS hack, but I'm also a big fan of first XCOM also. So tough choice.
The real good old school stuff.
Yeah.
Tell us what got you into the video game industry.
Yeah, good question. Actually, I didn't start in video games first. I studied in University of Art and Design in Helsinki, and then I studied in an era where it was this multimedia bubble, and interactive CD-ROMs and stuff like that, and television was changing to digital, and we thought in Finland that it can be even interactive. So I was actually trying to develop in the school, University of Art and Design in New Media Department, interactive television series that were a bit like game-like, but they used real film footage, sometimes 16mm film, but they were interactive narrative experiences, and that's how I was first actually asked to work with Finnish National Broadcasting Company to develop this type of concepts because they thought there that interactivity will be soon possible. Okay, it failed. It wasn't possible because set-top box that would have been interactive was too expensive, and everybody bought the cheapest possible Xbox in Finland. So they buried that standard, that interactive standard. But anyway, I worked 10 years first in television and film, and then I was a bit disappointed of the sort of like how national that is. That I would go a bit outside of Finland, and I found difficulties doing that inside television in industry. And then I was asked almost to join Digital Chocolate, that is the company that Supercell founders had before Supercell. And I went there, and that's how I started my career. Jami Laes, who was then in charge of recruitment, something he said, Kimmo, if you change to computer games, the game industry, you won't regret. It's gonna be exciting, and he was right. I haven't regretted.
So now that you're in the gaming industry, what's your favorite thing about it?
Favorite thing is that everything in this industry is basically possible. I would say that this industry really stretches the sort of the edges of technology, and nowadays the budget are similar or even bigger than big Hollywood special effects movies. So several hundreds of millions can be a budget to a one game, and then you have the most talented programmers and graphic artists doing that with the passion. So almost everything is possible in this industry. Of course, there is some limits, but this is really the pioneer place to be, and that's really exciting for me.
That's true, but everything is possible, but at a cost in this industry, as a price. What is this? What do you feel this price is? What makes you irritated or mad or sad?
No, I think the sad thing is I call it myself the Hollywood syndrome. This industry has nowadays a Hollywood syndrome. If you talk about AAA games, if you imagine being the person who are in charge of a budget, total budget of $1 billion. So if you have a game that has budget of $300 million, then usually the marketing budget is 2 or 3 times bigger. So it's totally $1 billion bet on something. And then you can imagine that you have this $1 billion, and then your design team comes that we have this new great idea. We would really like to test if it works. And then you have the other option, would we make Batman 12?
Yes, it's kind of obvious.
It's obvious. So with the most big budget games in this industry, they don't of course take these risks. So, but this is indie scene and lower budget things where the innovation still happen. But this is a bit also sad thing that those companies that really have the money, they don't sort of like afford or have the courage to take the risks. But yeah, I guess that's normal as well.
Well, like you said, Hollywood games is the thing today. What do you think the thing will be in 10 years, like a new big trend?
I think there will be many. I like to believe that in this industry, because of this sort of like safe betting that we are now witnessing, that we are safe betting. If I'm totally blunt, I'd say that sex and violence sells well in the game industry. So if you go to GameStop and you look what are the shelves there, there's a lot of violence stuff and okay, that sells well. That's why industry keeps doing it. But if you look to other forms of culture like literature, poetry, film, stuff like that, there are many genres there that games have not yet tapped, not at all. And I believe that in long term, game industry starts also to explore these other genres that those more major forms of culture had done already. And I'm really looking forward to see that. And I'm personally a sort of like fan of serious games, for example. It's a niche thing at the moment, but I would say that if it's done properly, well, professionally, it can be a really big thing, because then you have also the educational part. Because then because of course you have this talk that many parents said that hey, we have some screen time to our child, and the game's just a stupid hobby. But if you can really argue that hey, this game it's not fictional, it's based on a true story. For example, one could make a game about the Balkan War with several viewpoints. You can be a several character on the different sides, and understand the reasons why this thing happened in many multi-dimensional way, I would say. And that can be also entertaining, even though I don't actually I vote for Clint Eastwood style of making war entertaining. It's not actually really entertaining if you look what Clint Eastwood series about the Pacific war movies, for example. You feel really bad after watching Clint Eastwood's war movies, and I think honestly that that if you have strong moral and you do war games and someone is experiencing war game and want to really experience that, she should feel bad also, because war is not a fun thing. I admit that we have a war trauma in our family. My grandfather was a painter who lost his painting arm in the war, so I don't like war.
I think nobody does. Hope not, at least. But returning to the topic of video games, like you described this concept of a serious game with different perspectives. Would you say that this is the game that you would like to make if you had absolute creative and financial freedom, or maybe something else?
I think yes. I would perhaps try to finish my project. Actually, I started 20 years ago. My final thesis project to University of Art and Design. It was a sort of like a serious game, and topic was Jewish war that happened 0065 to 0073 after Christ. So almost 2,000 years ago, and it has actually a significant impact on the Western culture inside we are living today. What happened 2,000 years ago, but it's a bit taboo subject. So history books don't cover that really well, and we did a project back then about that with the exegesis department of University of Helsinki. There was a sort of like academy rewarded research group 3 times in a row or something, and they got some extra funding to popularize their great research and make some multimedia about it. And then I happened to be the guy sort of like executing the multimedia part, and I managed to convince them that we could try this sort of like Akira Kurosawa-Rashomon technique of making a multi-viewpoint experience about it, and with that I mean that we had 7 different most important social groups present in that game, and you could be a member of those, and then you can witness. You could be a Roman. You could be there were several different Jewish groups. Then you could be several different Jewish groups. You could be early follower of Jesus Christ. There were no Christianity at this time, but there were this Christianity was sort of like a bit like a hippie movement of Jewish thing. But anyway, you could penetrate with these different angles to witness the path that lead to this pretty terrible Holocaust that is called Jewish war. That just like several hundreds of thousands of people were killed 2,000 years ago, when the population of the whole world was like tens of millions. So it was procentually like big thing. And this serious game experience we were trying to then make would really give you many different viewpoints how to understand why it happened, without trying to hammer your head that this is the truth, but telling different sort of like viewpoints or truths or however you want to call that.
That sounds like a very detailed and complex project. I hope you have the time and the opportunity to bring it to life sometimes. But what do you think is more important for you in this project and just in the video games medium overall? Like the age-old question, graphics versus gameplay versus storytelling.
I think the storytelling has to be good if you have a story to tell. Of course, it is a game like a bubble shooter. You don't need a story. It's just pass of time, casual activity. But if you are trying to try to do a game that entertains the user a longer time than the 30 seconds or a couple of minutes, then usually a story is really good tool for that. And okay, when nowadays we work in a game industry with very sophisticated processors and whatever, so of course it makes sense that there is graphics. That okay, then you can read a book if you just want the story. But personally, I'm not sort of like the fanboy of super sort of like realistic graphics. That the skin is perfect and you look like you would look exactly like you in the game. Because we have this reality already. So personally, I like to go in the games in art-wise to that direction where it's more artistic. That if you look of paintings, you look at that cubist style. There's whatever styles in art as well. I would like the game to be more also experimental in their graphic style and look a bit also the history of art and not always try to be as realistic as possible. I think that's a bit boring approach.
Fair enough. Let's go back from video games for just a little time. St. Petersburg, we're here. What do you think about the city?
No, I've been here once, and I love the city. I went to this. You have this big Hermitage museum. I went there, almost lost there. It's big place and a lot of great paintings. It's big and beautiful city. I think you have 44 islands or something like that. Bridges. I'm surprised we have so beautiful town just few hours away with train from Helsinki, the capital of Finland. It's great.
And what about 4C, the conference we're having right here?
No, it's my first time and I'm just being here a few hours, so I don't know yet. I cannot yet say much because I don't have the experience to comment. But of course I'm honored that I'm invited to give a speech here, and so far arrangements and everything seems very professionally done, and looking really forward what will happen.
Any specific lecture you're looking forward to? Something you want to hear?
To be honest, I just came from another game conference, and then we have also yesterday the debut concert of this game music collective. So I've been also doing quite a bunch of work for my own presentation. So I haven't had yet time to look what the other guys are really talking here. But tomorrow morning I will do that.
Great. I hope you have the time to truly explore it. And finally, if you were standing here in my place, what question would you ask yourself?
That is almost too good question. You ask really good questions already, so it's really tough. Perhaps I would ask a question that would tries to tap the thing that this. I feel this a bit unfelt phenomenon happening in free-to-play mobile games, that if you want to go to top 10 or top 5 positions, as a normal indie developer you don't have any chance at the moment, because 10 years ago, when there was still some blue parts in the ocean of the market of mobile games, those companies who were active then, they have grown so big that they can put 100 million per year to market their mobile game. Only one mobile game budget can be 100 or 300 million per year. So there is no chance to indie or normal sort of like companies to go anymore to top 5 or top 10 positions. Due to this, I think it's a bit unhealthy that just with money, with so much money, you can sort of like look, you have this unfair competitive advantage. I don't know how to formulate that question, but I would like to have this answer. You can figure out the question.
Well, I figured out the question, but I hope we find the answer to it and to many other questions during this conference. I hope you find it interesting, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.